Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to realize they were never truly on your side? Have you felt the sting of betrayal, thinking it would break you, only to discover it was shaping your strength? Tonight, we're going to talk about the people who tried to control you, manipulate you, and take what was yours, and why their actions, their lies, their betrayal will never define you. Because the truth is, when someone betrays you, they don't just lose you, they set in motion a chain of events that will ultimately destroy them while you rise stronger than ever. Betrayal is often misunderstood as an act that simply breaks trust, but in truth, it reveals far more than it destroys. When someone betrays you, especially someone who once claimed closeness, loyalty, or love, what shatters isn't just the relationship, it's the illusion you held about who they truly were. Betrayal pulls the curtain back. It exposes character when words no longer matter and intentions can no longer hide behind charm, promises, or appearances. In moments of betrayal, pain feels personal, and the first instinct is often self-blame. You question your judgment, your worth, your choices. But betrayal is never a reflection of the value of the person who was betrayed. It is a revelation of the one who chose deception. It shows how someone behaves when integrity becomes inconvenient, when loyalty demands accountability, and when ego outweighs conscience. What they reveal in that moment is not a mistake. It is a truth. Betrayal also reveals something important about you. It shows how deeply you can trust, how sincerely you can love, and how honestly you can show up. That capacity, though it hurts when misused, is not a weakness. It is evidence of emotional courage. The pain you feel comes from depth, not deficiency. Over time, betrayal clarifies paths. It separates sincerity from performance, substance from image. It teaches discernment without stripping compassion. While the experience wounds, it also sharpens awareness. You begin to see patterns more clearly, value yourself more honestly, and recognize that access to your trust is something to be earned, not assumed. In this way, betrayal becomes an uninvited teacher. It reveals truth where comfort once lived, and although the lesson is painful, it is also liberating, because once the truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. And once that truth is revealed, something else becomes impossible to ignore: the illusion they were living in. Because betrayal doesn't happen in chaos, it happens in calculation. It happens when someone believes they are smarter than consequences, when they believe they can control people, outcomes, and narratives. Narcissists don't just betray, they strategize. They convince themselves they are always 3 steps ahead, that emotions are tools, and that people are replaceable pieces on a board they alone command. In their mind, control equals power. If they can twist a story, redirect blame, or exit without facing discomfort, they believe they've won. They assume silence means success. They assume your pain means their dominance. What they don't realize is that control built on manipulation is temporary, and power borrowed from others has an expiration date, because real control isn't about deception, it's about stability. And narcissists lack that. They depend on reactions, validation, and admiration to feel real. When they betray you, they believe they've removed a weakness. In truth, they've removed the very anchor that grounded them. They don't notice it at first. The confidence remains loud. The mask still fits. But slowly, the structure begins to wobble. What they fail to understand is that you were never controlled. You were choosing to stay. Your loyalty was voluntary. Your love was freely given. And when that choice disappears, so does their illusion of dominance. They aren't in control anymore because they never truly were. While they scramble to regain influence through stories, distractions, or replacements, you begin to reclaim your autonomy. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. And that quiet withdrawal becomes the one thing they cannot manipulate. That's when the illusion breaks. They realize control without connection is empty. And in losing you, they didn't gain freedom. They lost the only proof they ever had of power. And when that illusion of control finally cracks, there's one more lie that begins to fall apart. The lie that your pain meant you were weak. That somehow, because you hurt deeply, you were less powerful, less aware, less than them. But pain was never your weakness. Pain was the evidence of your humanity. You didn't suffer because you were fragile. You suffered because you were open, because you trusted with your whole heart, not halfway, because you loved without armor, without calculating exits or leverage. In a world where people guard themselves behind masks, That kind of openness is rare, and rare things are often misunderstood. They looked at your tears and thought they had won. They mistook your grief for dependence, your heartbreak for collapse. But what they failed to see was what pain was doing inside you. While they were clinging to the illusion of control, your pain was reshaping you. It was teaching you boundaries. It was teaching you self-respect. It was teaching you that feeling deeply is not the same as being powerless. Pain has a way of refining people. It strips away illusions, forces honesty, and demands growth. You didn't numb yourself. You didn't harden into someone unrecognizable. You felt everything and survived. That alone speaks volumes about your strength. The truth is, narcissists avoid pain at all costs. They run from accountability, deflect responsibility, and bury discomfort under ego. You faced pain head on, you sat with it, you learned from it, and that is something they will never understand because it requires courage they don't possess. Your pain didn't shrink you, it expanded you. It deepened your awareness, sharpened your intuition, and reminded you of your worth. And as you rose from it, steadier and clearer, they remained exactly where they were, dependent on illusions, still mistaking emotional numbness for strength. What broke you open is what ultimately made you unbreakable, and it's right there, in that unbreakable clarity, that the real consequence begins to take shape, not for you, but for them. Because when you rise from pain with your integrity intact, something irreversible happens. They lose a good soul. And that loss is not dramatic or immediate. It's quiet, permanent, and devastating in ways they never anticipated. At first, they feel relief. They tell themselves you were too emotional, too sensitive, too much. They convince themselves that walking away was freedom. But freedom without substance quickly turns hollow. Because what they discarded wasn't just a person, it was loyalty without conditions, presence without performance, love without manipulation. Those things are rare, and once lost, they cannot be replaced. They may find attention again. They may find admiration, convenience, even praise. But what they will not find is the safety of being truly known and still accepted. You offered that. You saw their flaws and didn't weaponize them. You believed in their potential even when they didn't earn it. That kind of acceptance becomes invisible only when it's gone. Over time, this loss reveals itself in subtle ways. Conversations feel shallow, connections feel transactional. People come and go easily because nothing is rooted, and slowly the realization settles in. The one person who loved them without needing to be impressed is no longer there. You were the calm in their chaos, the witness to their real self, the steady presence they took for granted. Losing you wasn't an escape, it was a fracture. And while you moved forward carrying wisdom instead of resentment, they stayed circling the same emptiness, searching for something that feels real again. That's the consequence they never saw coming. Not punishment, not revenge, but the permanent absence of someone who loved them honestly. And that absence becomes a silence they can never quite fill. And in that silence, something else begins to happen. Something they spent their entire life trying to avoid. The mask starts to slip. Without you there to soften the edges, to translate their moods, to protect their image with understanding and loyalty, the version of themselves they carefully curated can no longer hold. For a long time, you unknowingly helped keep that mask in place. You made excuses. You filled in gaps. You saw the good and chose to highlight it, even when the cracks were visible. Your presence gave their persona credibility. When you walked away, the performance lost its supporting cast. At first, they double down, they charm harder, they exaggerate, they rewrite history. But masks require energy, and false narratives need constant reinforcement. Over time, inconsistencies surface, stories don't align, patterns repeat, and people begin to notice, not because you expose them, but because truth eventually introduces itself. What once seemed confident now feels defensive. What once looked magnetic begins to feel hollow. The very traits they relied on to impress start to repel. Without a genuine connection anchoring them, their behavior becomes more obvious, more predictable, and less forgivable. This is the quiet collapse, not a public scandal, not a dramatic downfall, but a gradual erosion of credibility. Trust thins, patience runs out, people stop giving the benefit of the doubt, and the narcissist, who thrived on being admired, begins to feel unseen. You didn't need to reveal anything, your absence did the work. When you stopped protecting the illusion, reality stepped in. The truth didn't shout, it simply stood still and waited. And while their mask crumbles in front of new eyes, you are no longer there to witness it. You're busy living without pretending, connecting without performing, and standing in a truth that doesn't require maintenance. That's the power of walking away with integrity. When you choose honesty over attachment, the false eventually collapses on its own. And when that false structure finally collapses, there's often a quiet temptation to look back, to want them to see it, to hope they feel the weight of what they lost. That's human. But this is where your path takes a different turn. Because while they remain entangled in appearances and consequences, you step into something far more powerful than revenge: growth. Growth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand witnesses. It simply lifts you. While they are consumed with preserving an image, you're building a life. While they are replaying narratives, you're creating new ones. And that upward movement becomes the most profound form of justice there is. Not because it punishes them, but because it frees you. Revenge keeps you emotionally tethered. It requires their attention, their reaction, their downfall. Growth requires none of that. Growth is self-contained. It restores your energy, your clarity, your sense of direction. It returns you to yourself as you heal. Something subtle but undeniable happens. Your standards change. Your tolerance shifts. What once confused you now feels obvious. What once pulled you in no longer reaches you. You stop asking why they did what they did because your life no longer depends on understanding theirs. And from a distance, that elevation is felt. They may not have access to you anymore, but they sense the difference. Your absence isn't just physical, it's energetic. You're no longer available for chaos, explanation, or emotional labor, and that is something they cannot compete with. Growth doesn't humiliate them. It outgrows them. It quietly closes doors without slamming them. It teaches you that the best response to betrayal is not destruction, but expansion. You become living proof that pain can be transformed into wisdom and loss into alignment. And in choosing growth over revenge, you don't just heal. You rise beyond the reach of everything that once tried to break you. And as you rise beyond the need to react, you begin to recognize something you once underestimated: your empathy. The very thing they exploited, dismissed, or tried to drain from you becomes clear in a new light. Empathy was never your vulnerability. It was your power, just one you hadn't yet learned how to protect. Empathy is the ability to see, to feel, to understand without losing yourself. But narcissists confuse empathy with access. They assume that because you can understand pain, you will tolerate harm. They assume that because you can forgive, you will endure betrayal. And for a time, that misunderstanding costs you deeply. But growth reshapes empathy. It matures it. You learn that empathy without boundaries is self-abandonment, but empathy with self-respect is strength. You don't lose your compassion, you refine it. You become discerning about where your care is invested and who is worthy of your emotional presence. This is where the balance shifts completely. Narcissists lack empathy not because they are strong, but because they are disconnected. They cannot sit with discomfort, cannot truly see others beyond their own reflection. You, however, can hold complexity. You can understand without excusing. You can feel without being consumed. And that ability gives you depth they will never reach. It allows you to build connections rooted in truth, not performance. It allows you to walk away without hatred, to set boundaries without cruelty, to choose peace without becoming cold. Your empathy, once misused, now becomes intentional. It no longer bleeds into people who drain you. It flows toward those who reciprocate, respect, and grow with you. That's the shift they never see coming. You don't harden, you strengthen. You don't lose your humanity, you reclaim it. And in doing so, you become something they cannot manipulate, cannot provoke, and cannot replace: a person who feels deeply, sees clearly, and chooses wisely. That is real power. And with that kind of power, quiet, grounded, self-aware, you stop waiting for loud consequences. Because by now, you understand something most people miss: karma doesn't arrive with thunder, it arrives with silence. And for narcissists, silence is unbearable. They may still appear surrounded by people, they may still post smiles, success, movement, but loneliness isn't about being alone, it's about being unseen. And when empathy is absent, connection never goes deeper than surface level. Every interaction becomes transactional, every relationship becomes conditional, and slowly, the world around them begins to feel thin. You see, narcissists thrive on reflection. They need others to mirror back importance, admiration, relevance. Without genuine bonds, that reflection grows distorted. People sense the imbalance. They pull back. Conversations shorten, invitations fade, trust doesn't deepen, and what remains is a room full of noise with no real presence. That's the karma. Not suffering, but emptiness. Not punishment, but repetition. The same conflicts, the same breakdowns, the same endings over and over again, different faces, same outcomes, and each time the common denominator remains. Meanwhile, your world becomes quieter but fuller, fewer people, deeper connections, less chaos, more meaning. You don't need to perform to be accepted. You don't need to impress to be valued. You are known, and that knowing creates peace. Their loneliness echoes because it's unresolved. Yours, when it appears, is chosen, a pause, a reset, a space for growth. And there is a vast difference between solitude and abandonment. They sit with the consequences of avoiding introspection. You sit with the rewards of doing the work. And while they may never outwardly admit it, there are moments, late unguarded moments, when the absence of real connection becomes undeniable. That is when betrayal completes its cycle, not with regret spoken aloud, but with a quiet realization in losing someone who is real, they inherited a loneliness no audience can fix. And in that quiet, unshakable loneliness, one truth becomes painfully clear to them. The loss isn't just situational, it's existential. They begin to realize, perhaps too late, that you were never the problem. You were never the flaw to be corrected, the obstacle to overcome, or the challenge to be dominated. You were the foundation they leaned on without noticing, the stability they took for granted, the consistency they mistook for weakness. From the outside, it may have looked like they had everything under control, that their charm and strategy ensured dominance, that your presence was simply another resource to manage. But the foundation matters more than the walls built on top of it. When a solid, authentic person like you steps away, what remains is fragile. What once seemed secure is suddenly hollow. And for someone who cannot introspect, cannot admit fault, and cannot cultivate genuine connection, that hollow becomes impossible to fill. This is the irony of betrayal. They thought they were gaining freedom or leverage, but in reality, removing you from their life removed the only anchor that could have kept them grounded. Your departure didn't just end a relationship, it ended the stability they depended on without realizing it. They lost perspective, accountability, and depth, the very things that make life meaningful and connections lasting. Meanwhile, you are free from illusion. You are untethered from performance, from manipulation, from the weight of carrying someone else's ego. You move forward with clarity, carrying lessons instead of resentment, wisdom instead of regret. And that difference, the difference between hollow control and grounded authenticity, is felt even if it's never acknowledged. They may search for what you provided, but what they lost cannot be replaced. They don't see it at first, but the emptiness is constant. And in that realization, whether they admit it or not, the truth of their loss becomes unavoidable. And finally, when all of this settles, the pain, the growth, the quiet absence of what they took for granted, you arrive at the most powerful truth of all. Rising is the ultimate statement. Theirs was a world built on manipulation, control, and borrowed admiration. Yours is a life built on resilience, integrity, and self-respect. While they scramble to replace what they lost, you have already transformed it into something unshakable, your own existence, thriving beyond their reach. Rising doesn't require dramatics. It doesn't need to humiliate or shout, it simply unfolds. Every decision you make to honor yourself, very boundary you enforce. Every moment you spend nurturing your own growth and happiness is a declaration they cannot erase. You rise not to punish them, but to reclaim your own life, to show yourself and the world that your worth was never contingent on their approval or presence. And in rising, you rewrite the story. No longer the betrayed, no longer the misunderstood, no longer the underestimated. You become the person they underestimated at every turn. The one who loved fully, endured deeply, and chose courage over bitterness. The one who turned heartbreak into wisdom and absence into freedom. Their loss becomes your liberation. Their emptiness becomes your abundance. And the most beautiful irony is this: the life they sought to control, the soul they tried to break, becomes the very life they can no longer touch, the very strength they can no longer diminish. So when they look back, if they ever do, they will see only what they destroyed, not what they could have cherished. And that is the ultimate consequence. Not a public reckoning, not loud vengeance, but the undeniable truth that the person they betrayed didn't just survive, they soared. Because rising, after all, is more than recovery. It is your final, unassailable statement. You were never theirs to break, and in leaving, they lost something they can never reclaim. And so, as we reach the end of this journey together, take a moment to feel the weight and the power of what we've explored. Every betrayal, every moment of doubt, every heartbreak you endured was never the end of your story. It was the beginning of your transformation. The people who tried to control you, manipulate you, or diminish your light were never the measure of your worth. They were merely the reflection of their own emptiness, and the lessons they forced upon you became the very tools that built your strength. Think about it, every T. You chose to rise instead of retaliate. Every time you healed instead of hardened. Every time you reclaimed your peace instead of clinging to anger, you were sending a message louder than words. Your life, your happiness, your self-respect are non-negotiable. And that is a truth no narcissist, no betrayer, no manipulator can ever take from you. Your story, your resilience becomes a beacon. It tells others who watch, who listen, who have been in the same shadows, you are not defined by those who chose to betray you. You are defined by the courage it takes to keep showing up, the wisdom it takes to protect your heart, and the strength it takes to rise above the chaos. By the end of this journey, remember this: the ultimate victory is not in seeing them stumble or regret, but in seeing yourself thrive, fully and unapologetically. You are not just surviving betrayal, you are rewriting it. You are turning absence into abundance, pain into power, and loss into liberation. So stay with me until the last second, because this isn't just a speech. It's a declaration, a reminder, a promise to yourself that no one, no matter how cunning, can ever take away the life, the joy, and the light you are choosing to live every single day. You rose, you rise, and you will continue to rise.